Section 9 of the Insomnia Collection, Volume 6. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Verla Viera. Excerpts from the Draughtsman's Handbook of Plan and Map Drawing, including instructions for the preparation of engineering, architectural, and mechanical drawings, with numerous illustrations and colored examples, by George G. Andre, C.E., M.Sc. London, E. and F. N. Spahn, 48 Charing Cross. New York, 446 Broome Street, 1874. Preface. The main purpose of the present work is to be a handy book of reference for draftsmen engaged chiefly in topographical drawings, but to have limited its use to one class of draftsmen, and especially to the skilled members of that class, would have necessitated the discovery of more cogent reasons for its publication than its author has yet been able to adduce. Works of such a character exist already, and though their imperfections are numerous, they fulfill their purpose in a fairly satisfactory manner. But had the field been clear in this direction, it is so restricted in extent that to have entered upon it would have been to undertake a labor that promised little fruit, for such a work could be only of small utility even to those for whom it was specially intended. It was therefore determined to make the present handbook generally useful by giving it a much wider scope, and hence, if the intention has been efficiently carried out, it may claim a place in every drawing office, be it that of the topographer, the hydrographer, the surveyor, the military, civil, or mechanical engineer, or the architect. Whether or not this degree of success has been achieved is not for the author to judge, but should he have failed to reach the high mark at which he has aimed, he hopes, with some degree of confidence, that he has at least succeeded in producing a book which the experienced draftsman will find valuable as a book of reference, and which the pupil may constantly consult with profit. A want has long been felt by draftsmen for some work of this kind, to which they might refer their pupils in the office, and it may not be presumptive to suppose that the present work has supplied that want. To render it convenient for this twofold purpose, it has been divided into two parts. In the first part, the principles and practices of the art have been clearly but briefly explained and illustrated, while in the second part, the application of the principles previously learned has been treated of, and such information given as relates directly to the duties of the practitioner. Of course, in a work of the present character, originality in the matter is neither to be expected nor desired. Enough if the manner shows some novelty, and is such as to add value to the matter. Although the preparation of maps and plans has received the chief share of attention, engineering, architectural, and mechanical drawings have been largely treated of. Projection, orthographic, isometric, and perspective has been altogether omitted as beyond the scope of the work. But coloring and shading have been fully considered and profusely illustrated. The plates appended as examples for reference are numerous and varied in character. They have been specially prepared by B. Alexander, to whom the author offers his warmest thanks for the truly admirable manner in which he has executed the work entrusted to him. 16 Craven Street, Charing Cross, September 7th, 1874. Part 1. The Essential Elements. Section 1. The Drawing Office and its Furnishings. There are few occupations so dependent for their correct performance upon minute matters of detail as that of the draftsman. Things apparently the most trivial are sufficient to render inaccurate or to mar the appearance of the otherwise most carefully and skillfully executed design, and as the value of a drawing depends wholly upon its accuracy and its appearance, it is obvious that such matters of detail, however trivial they may be in themselves, demand careful attention. We have, therefore, deemed it desirable to preface our remarks on plan and map drawing with a brief description of the instruments and materials required, and of the mode of using them which experience has shown to be the best. The drawing office. The first essentials of a room for drawing in are that it shall be quite free from damp and be well lighted. The position of the windows is a matter of some importance, and though persons have largely to accommodate themselves to circumstances in this respect, it is desirable to know what are the most suitable conditions in order that they may be complied with as far as circumstances permit. Skylights are unsuitable, because the light entering from above is liable to be intercepted by the body, and especially by the hands of the draftsman, besides which the light from a skylight is seldom sufficient. For the same reasons, a window placed very high in the room is objectionable. When possible, a western aspect is to be preferred, as the light from this direction is less variable and lasts later in the day than from other directions. Blinds of some kind are necessary to modify the light when the sun shines directly upon the window. Gas lights should be situate about 3 feet above the drawing table, and there should be 2 burners, placed not less than 2 feet apart, as otherwise the hands and the instruments will cast shadows which will prevent fine lines and points from being seen. The drawing table should be placed under the window. It should have a breadth of about 2 feet 6 inches, and its height should be 3 feet 8 inches at the back and 3 feet 6 inches at the front. The front edge should be rounded over. Dusters and means for washing the hands must also be provided, as it is requisite to frequently dust the paper in the instruments and to keep the hands perfectly clean. Instruments. All drawing instruments should be of the best workmanship, for it is impossible to obtain accuracy with imperfect tools, and they must be kept in order by careful handling. For all kinds of drawing, compasses of 3 sizes are required: the ordinary compass, the bows, and the spring bows. The best compasses are those which are sector jointed. The points should be kept sufficiently sharp not to slip on the paper, but not so sharp as to readily penetrate it. It is also important that the points be thin and round, as otherwise, when several arcs have to be struck from the same center, the compass leg is apt to make a large hole, which is utterly destructive of accuracy. The pencil leg should be kept exactly equal in length to the steel leg, for true circles cannot be drawn when one leg is shorter than the other. In removing the movable leg, care should be taken to draw it straight out, as nothing spoils the instrument so soon as wrenching the leg from side to side. In using the compasses, the instrument should be held lightly between the thumb and the forefinger only. It should not be pressed upon the paper, but it should rest equally upon both points. If the weight of the hand be thrown upon the instrument, the points will penetrate the paper. Care should also be taken to bend the joints so as to keep both legs perpendicular to the paper. If attention be not given to this matter, the steel leg will make a large hole in the paper, and the ink leg, will make a ragged line because only one of the nibs will touch. Next in importance to the compass, and of more frequent use, is the drawing pen. The draftsman should possess at least 2 of these instruments, one for fine and another for medium lines. When the proper opening of the nibs for fine lines has once been obtained, it is desirable not to change it. The pen can always be cleaned by passing a piece of drawing paper between the nibs. The cleaning of the pen should be carefully attended to. It should never be put away without having every particle of dried ink removed from it, and frequently, while in use, it should be wiped out to remove the dust, which is constantly settling in it, as well as the particles of lead that are taken up from the paper. The ink is supplied by breathing between the nibs and dipping them in the liquid, or by means of a camel's hair brush. When the latter method is adopted, care should be taken to protect the brush from the dust floating in the atmosphere of the room. After considerable wear, the drawing pen will require setting. The operation of setting requires some judgment and considerable practice, and is one of those mechanical niceties which it is difficult to describe. Generally, it will be found advantageous to have the pen set by an instrument maker. As, however, this resource is not always at hand, it is desirable that the draftsman should be able to set his own pen. The following description of the operation, given by W. Binns in his admirable work on projection, is the best we have seen. Quote, "The nibs must be precisely of the same length, rounded in 2 directions, and as sharp as it is possible to make them, without producing to the touch a sensation of cutting, and without scratching the surface of the paper when drawing a line, which is generally the case when one nib is longer than the other. This irregularity may be detected by placing alternately the sides of the pen at an acute angle with the forefinger, and slipping the edge of the nail over the point, when the difference in length will be at once perceived. And it may be reduced by drawing a few lines, as it were, on a turkey stone, with the pen applied to the edge of a set square in the same manner as if drawing lines upon paper, but with this difference, that during the longitudinal motion of the pen, the handle must be turned over in a circular manner, so as to give a rounded form to the point of the pen. If the pen be now held with the point directed towards the eye, and gently moved about so as to catch the angle of reflection, a bright speck on one or both nibs will be observed, which must be reduced by rubbing the pen to and fro upon the stone, giving at the same time a slight rotary motion to the handle, which must be held at an angle of about 20 degrees with the face of the stone. The point of the pen being examined from time to time, and the process of reducing the bright specks continued until the point is as fine as can be used without cutting or scratching the paper. If at this stage the 2 nibs are of the same length, a perfectly solid and fine line can be drawn. The beginner, however, must not be disappointed if 60 minutes are thus expended before he can produce a satisfactory result, whereas 2 minutes in the hands of a practitioner would suffice." End quote. The instrument most frequently in the hands of the draftsman is the lead pencil. These are required of various degrees of hardness, but for lines that are to be ruled, an HH is the best. The most suitable qualities of lead are those which are the most easily rubbed out. These qualities are sometimes gritty, but this defect is more than compensated by the facility with which a line may be removed from the paper. There is some art in cutting a pencil properly. If the point is intended for sketching, it should be cut equally from all sides, so as to produce a perfectly acute cone. But for line drawing, a flat or chisel point should always be used. This point is much stronger and will last much longer than the cone point. To produce the chisel point, first cut the pencil from two sides only with a long slope, and afterwards cut the other sides away only just sufficiently to round the first edge a little. This side wood is needed both to afford a support to the lead and to show in what direction the point stands. To avoid breaking the lead, the knife should be held at an acute angle with it. A point cut in this manner may be kept in order for some time by rubbing it upon a fine file or upon a piece of glass paper or fine sandstone. Of the other instruments used in drawing, nothing need be said in this work, as their use presents no difficulties. It may, however, be well to remark that no straight edge employed for ruling lines should be less than 1/14 of an inch thick, for if the edge be very thin, it will be impossible to prevent the ink from escaping from the pen onto it. Materials. The drawing papers known as Whatmans are the best prepared of any obtainable, and they are almost universally employed. Of these there are two kinds, the smooth and the rough. The former is technically called knot paper, and is the more suitable for mechanical and architectural drawings. The rough is more effective for perspectives and Gothic elevations. A third kind is shown as the hot pressed, but as it does not take color so well as the knot and the rough, it is not often used. The various sizes are indicated by their names, which are the following: Antiquarian, 53 by 31 inches. Atlas, 34 by 26 inches. Colombier, 34.5 by 23.5 inches. Demi, 20 by 15 inches. Double Elephant, 40 by 26 3/4 inches. Elephant, 28 by 23 inches. Emperor, 68 by 48 inches. Imperial, 30 by 22 inches. Medium, 22 3/4 by 17 inches. Royal, 24 by 19 1/4 inches. Super Royal, 27.5 by 19 1/4 inches. The sizes considered best and almost universally used for engineering and architectural drawings are the elephant, the double elephant, and the imperial. If smaller sizes are required, the half or quarter sheet is used. Antiquarian has generally a good surface to draw upon, and it is preferred by some architects. The Atlas is also a very good paper. Besides the foregoing, there is the machine-made or cartridge paper, which is very commonly employed for detailed drawings. It has not so good a surface as the other kinds, nor is it so white. Its chief advantage is found in its dimensions, it being made uniformly 53 inches wide and continuous. Hence, the exact length required may be obtained. For large plans and competition drawings, either cartridge or emperor paper is used. Paper that is to receive an elaborate drawing must be stretched and glued to the board. This operation is one requiring a little skill and some practice to perform successfully. The following is the best manner of proceeding. The sheet to be strained is laid face upward upon the board, and a wet sponge is passed rapidly along the margins, and then across the face, including the margins, until the whole surface is sufficiently and uniformly wetted. The object of wetting the margins first is to prevent cockling by allowing them a longer time to expand in than the middle of the paper. The sheet must now be left for about 10 minutes, or until the wet gloss has entirely disappeared. The process of gluing to the board is as follows. A straight edge is laid along one end of the sheet, and about 3/8 of an inch of the margin is turned up against it and glued by means of a brush. The margin is then turned down and rubbed quickly with a knife handle, or, still better, a paper knife. The opposite end of the sheet is next pulled outwards and glued in the same way, and the same method is afterwards applied to the top and bottom margins. Some draftsmen prefer to glue down the adjoining edges, but generally it will be found that laying down successfully opposite edges will give more satisfactory results. The contraction of the paper in drying should leave the face quite flat and solid. During the process of drying, it is important to keep the board in a perfectly horizontal position, as otherwise the water will gravitate towards the lower side and soften the glue, and as the sheet will dry unequally, the lower edge will break away. The thinner the glue used, the better, and for this reason, the best quality should be obtained, and care should be taken to keep the water supplied that is lost by evaporation. When it becomes necessary to replenish the glue pot, the cake should be soaked in cold water for at least 8 hours. The removal of a drawing from the board presents no difficulty. A pencil line is drawn along the margin at a sufficient distance from the edge to be clear of the glue, and a penknife is guided along this line by a straight edge not used for drawing. As duplicates of drawings, especially if they be working drawings, are usually tracings. Tracing paper is an important material in every drawing office. It is too well known to need a description. It is sold in various sizes and of various prices, but the most usual sizes are 30 by 20 inches and 40 by 30 inches, the price of the former being 3d and that of the latter 6d a sheet. It may also be purchased in continuous lengths of 24 yards, 42 inches wide, for about 8 shillings, or if extra stout, 16 shillings. A much less expensive mode of obtaining tracing paper is to make it oneself. Common silk or tissue paper may be purchased in quantities at less than a halfpenny a sheet of the ordinary size. This may be prepared by placing a single sheet at a time flat upon a board or other smooth horizontal surface, and applying a mixture of boiled linseed oil and turpentine. This mixture should be composed of 1 part of oil to 5 of turpentine, and it should be applied with a small sponge. 1 coating is sufficient, and it should not be put on too thickly. Each sheet, as prepared, should be hung over a string stretched across the room to dry, and when all the clear, oily marks have entirely disappeared, it will be ready for use. 5 gills of turpentine and 1 of oil is enough for 2 quires of double-crown tissue paper. That tracing paper is best which is toughest, most transparent, and most free from greasiness. The continuous papers are more economical than those in sheets because just the quantity required can always be taken from the roll. For durability, tracing cloth is to be recommended. It is sold in continuous lengths of 24 yards, and it may be had from 18 inches to 41 inches in width. That known as Sager's vellum cloth is of excellent quality, both for transparency and strength. Some kinds of drawings, such as specification for letters patent, plans upon deeds, etc., have frequently to be made upon parchment. Special kinds of parchment can be obtained for these purposes. There is a kind made which is quite transparent and which can be purchased cut to the Patent Office regulation size. As parchment has always a more or less greasy surface, before commencing to ink or to color, it should be pounced over with pouncet of finely powdered French chalk. Besides this precaution, it will be necessary to add a little ox gall to the ink or color. Blacklead and carbonic paper are used to transfer a drawing. The former is prepared by rubbing thin paper over with a soft block of Cumberland lead. The latter, by painting one side of the paper with lampblack ground to perfect fineness in slow-drying oil. Carbonic paper is used for coarser work than blacklead paper. Both may be purchased, properly prepared, at a trifling cost. The drawing to be copied is laid over the sheet of paper which is to receive the copy, with a sheet of the blacklead or carbonic paper interposed, and a tracer is passed with a light pressure over the lines. This method is mostly used to reproduce a drawing from a tracing, to obtain a finished copy from a rough draft that has become soiled and marked in designing, or to avoid errors or small alterations in the first drawing. A very convenient kind of paper for small working drawings or for sketching to scale is that known as sectional paper. This is paper ruled into small squares to a given scale with pale ink. The spaces in ordinary use are 1/10, 1/8, 1/6, 1/5, and 1/4 inch. Thicker lines are drawn either to mark off the inches or to count the spaces in tens. With this paper, the scale may be dispensed with, as the eye is capable of subdividing the spaces with sufficient accuracy for practical purposes. Sectional paper is much used for sections of railway cuttings and embankments, as it affords a ready means of calculating the contents. It is also made up into sketching books and architects' pocket books, for which purposes it is peculiarly convenient. Indian ink is used for all kinds of geometrical drawings. Being free from acid, it does not corrode the steel points of the instruments, and it preserves its color unchanged. It is difficult to get the genuine ink, but even that, as it is imported from China, varies considerably in quality. For line drawing, that is the best quality, which will wash up least when other colors are passed over it. This quality is ascertained in the trade, though not with absolute certainty, by breaking off a small portion. If it be of the right quality, it will show a very bright and almost prismatic colored fracture. The ink is prepared for use by rubbing it with water on a slab or in a saucer. The saucer should be quite smooth inside, so as not to abrade the ink. When mixed to the requisite thickness, which may be ascertained by drawing a line with a common pen, it should be covered to protect it from the particles of dust floating about the room. Ink should be rubbed up perfectly black, for pale ink makes the boldest drawing look weak. But after it has become black, any further mixing will only injure it by rendering it viscid. It is best to use it immediately after it is mixed, for if redissolved, it becomes cloudy and irregular in tone. The addition of a little ox gall will make it flow more freely from the pen. For erasing Cumberland lead pencil marks, native or bottle India rubber is sufficient. But for other kinds of pencils, fine vulcanized India rubber is better. This, besides being a more powerful eraser, possesses the important quality of keeping clean, as it frets away with the friction of rubbing, and thus presents a continually renewed surface. Vulcanized rubber is also very useful for cleaning off drawings. Precautions and remarks. It is essential to the good appearance of a drawing that the paper be preserved perfectly clean. The hands especially should be kept as much as possible from resting on it, as the perspiration makes it greasy, and when once it has acquired this defect, clear, sharp lines become impossible. A sheet of clean paper should be constantly interposed between the draughtsman's hands and the drawing upon which he is working. Brown or printed paper is unfit for this purpose, as the former is either greasy or tarry, and the latter is apt to soil from the printed matter. White paper can be had of large size, or, if necessary, several sheets may be pasted together. To prevent risk of smearing the lines when inking in, it is well to begin at the top of the drawing and to work downwards, also from the right to the left for vertical lines. The ink slab or saucer should be kept on one side and never in front of the drawing. Should a drawing get a grease spot, it may be removed by the application of a hot smoothing iron to a piece of clean blotting paper laid over the spot, but not sufficiently to be colored over. Great care should be taken to correctly place the center lines of a drawing. These lines should be drawn very fine and distinct. In working drawings, the center lines are of great importance, as the dimensions are always measured from them. In such cases, it is customary to draw them in red or blue color. In all cases where a plane figure is symmetrical with respect to a given line, whether the line exists in the figure or may be considered as existing in it, that line should be drawn first, and such a line is known as the center line. The centers of all arcs should be marked for the ink compasses at the time the arc is struck by the pencil, by placing a small hand-drawn circle around it. It is also necessary to mark distinctly by short intersecting straight lines the exact points at which the arc begins and ends. When a number of concentric circles have to be struck, the smaller ones should be struck first, as it is more difficult, when the hole in the paper becomes enlarged, to draw a small circle than a large one. Whenever it is practicable, lines should be drawn from a given point rather than to it, and if there are several points in one, of which two or more lines meet, the line should be drawn from that one to the others. Thus, for example, radii should be drawn from the center to the points in the circumference of a circle. When a point has to be determined by the intersection of circular arcs or straight lines, these should not meet at an angle less than 30 degrees. In dividing a line into a number of parts, instead of setting off the part repeatedly along the line, it is better to set off a convenient multiple of the given part and subdivide it. That is, to work from the whole to the parts, rather than from the parts to the whole. This is an important principle in surveying as well as in plan drawing, and in the construction of scales it ought always to be observed. Ink lines should never be erased with a knife, nor should an ink eraser be used, especially if the drawing is to be colored. A needlepoint will take out a short line in a way that leaves little trace of the error. A very good means of taking out a line is furnished by a piece of Oakey's No. 1 glass paper, folded several times until it presents a round edge. The application of this leaves the surface of the paper in a much better condition for drawing upon than it is left in by the knife. When the drawing is to be colored, it is best to wash out a wrong line with a small hard brush, and to slightly sponge over the place through a hole of the requisite size cut in a scrap of drawing paper to save the other parts of the drawing. When a line has been drawn a little beyond the point at which it should terminate, it will generally be found better to avoid erasure by laying a little Chinese white over the line with a fine sable brush. Sometimes, when erasures are unavoidable upon a drawing that is to be colored, it will be found expedient to take the surface off the whole of the paper with glass paper. The color will then flow equally. In copying from a tracing, it is well to put a sheet of drawing paper underneath the tracing, for it not only shows up the lines more distinctly, but it prevents the dividers from tearing the drawing while taking off measurements. Before commencing a drawing, a cutting off line should be drawn all round the sheet, clear of the glued portion. The portions outside of this line are useful to try the drawing pen upon before drawing a line, or for trying a tint when coloring. Care should be taken not to leave too narrow a margin, for nothing detracts more from the appearance of a good drawing. For a drawing occupying a space of 1 foot or 15 inches square over all, there should be a margin of at least 5 inches all round, with the border line from 1½ to 2 inches from the cut-off line. Other sizes should be in proportion. This rule is given by Maxton in his engineering drawing, who also has the following remarks on cutting off and preserving drawings. Quote, "The opposite side should never be cut first, for if so cut, upon nearly completing the cutting of the third side, the paper undergoes contraction, and the fourth side pulling against it is apt to snap off the remaining inch or so, and generally in towards the sheet, seldom in the margin on the outside of the cutting off line. The sheet should be cut off all around, taking care, by applying the knife blade under the edge of the sheet, that it is free from the board before proceeding to cut off the side or end adjoining. When the sheet has been removed, the strips of drawing paper left on the board should be simply sponged over 2 or 3 times, and they will peel off easily. For preserving a rolled drawing, a common substitute for string, and one less likely to crease the drawing, is made as follows. Take a strip of drawing paper from 1½ to 2 inches wide, and 1 inch longer than the circumference of the rolled drawing. About ½ inch from each end, make incisions, at one end in the middle and 1/3 of the breadth across, and at the other end at the sides, each 1/3 of the breadth across. Fold in these sides so that they may pass through the incision in the opposite end of the strip. On being opened again after they have passed through, the whole will form a hoop which, when slipped over the drawing, will keep it secure." End quote. As cartridge paper is not always suitable, it sometimes becomes necessary to join the smaller sizes end to end. To do this neatly, the edges should be cut straight and a straight edge laid upon the paper, allowing 3/8 inch to project beneath it. This portion of the paper should then be rubbed down with sand or glass paper until the outer edge is quite thin. The edges of both sheets to be joined must be treated in this way and covered with a thin coating of gum. Having placed these edges in contact, a strip of paper 1½ or 2 inches wide should be laid upon the joint and well rubbed with the handle of a paper knife. If the paper thus joined has afterwards to be stretched on a board, it should be done while the joint is damp. In sponging the paper, care must be taken not to go over the joint. In joining sheets of tracing paper, the joint should never be made more than 1/4 inch broad. The gum used for this purpose should be very thin, and a strip of drawing paper should be placed upon each side of the joint until it is quite dry. It is a good plan to roll the joined sheet upon a roller with the joint in a line with the roller and the strips enfolded over the joint. When left to dry in this position, the joint will be perfectly smooth. Drawings have frequently to be mounted on stretchers, and the operation of mounting is one requiring some care and practice. Generally, it will be found more convenient to purchase the stretcher ready-made complete, but when this is not done, care must be taken to have the frame made of sufficient strength to resist the tension of the paper when dry. The sides and the ends of a stretcher, 8 or 9 feet long, should be 4 inches broad and not less than 7/8 inch thick, and for any length above 18 inches, there should be 1 or more bars across. A frame 6 feet long should have 2 crossbars dividing the length into 3 equal parts, and they should be of such a thickness as not to come up flush with the sides and ends by about 1/8 inch. The inner edges on the face of the latter should be rounded down to the level of the crossbars, and the same degree of rounding should be given to the edges of the crossbars themselves. This is necessary to prevent the edges from showing a soiled mark on the paper. When the frame has been thus prepared, the linen or calico should be spread out on some flat surface, and the frame laid upon it face downwards. The ends of the linen should then be pulled over and nailed to the back. Next, the middle of the sides should be pulled over and fixed in the same way. The intermediate spaces are afterwards tacked down by placing a tack alternately on opposite sides, care being taken to pull the linen tight and smooth before inserting the tack. It is a good plan to fold the edge, as the double thickness will hold the tacking better than if single. To mount the paper on the stretcher, it should be laid face downwards upon a clean, flat surface, which will be all the better if covered with a clean cloth and sponged with clean water. When the water has soaked in, apply with a flat brush some cold flour paste, and, if necessary, remove all knots or particles of gritty matter, as these would prevent the paper from lying close to the linen. The addition of a little alum to the paste improves its adhesive property, and also tends to make the drawing less stiff when dry. When a good coating of paste has been well distributed over the paper, place the stretcher upon the paper and rub the back of the linen well. Then turn the stretcher over and rub down the edges of the paper. Air bubbles between the linen and the paper may be got rid of by puncturing the spot with the fine needle and rubbing it down. Paper thus mounted may be drawn upon nearly as well as when stretched on a board. To give an edge for the T-square, a strip of wood with parallel edges may be temporarily nailed on. Some drawings, such as large plans of estates, have frequently to be varnished. This operation requires some skill and can be satisfactorily accomplished only by a practiced hand. The process generally adopted is to stretch the drawing upon a frame and to give it 3 or 4 coats of isinglass size with a flat, broad brush, taking care to well cover it each time and to allow it time to dry between each coat. The best varnish is Canada balsam, diluted in oil of turpentine. This requires to be put on evenly in a flowing coat with a fine, flat brush, and to be left in a warm room, free from dust, until it is thoroughly dry. The drawing must be in a perfectly horizontal position, while the size and the varnish are being applied. In drawings to be varnished, thick lines, such as shade lines, and chalky colors should never be put on before sizing, as they are apt to blot during the process. Should a fur drawing board get accidentally dented, an application of water to the part will, within certain limits, bring it up to its proper level. Section 3. Lines, dots, and their combinations. All kinds of drawings are made up of lines and dots. These are the constituent parts, the materials which the draftsman has to employ. It is therefore essential that he should make himself acquainted with their various forms and uses, and familiar with those means of producing them which experience has shown to be the best, before commencing the study of the principles by which the representation of an object is delineated. And moreover, it is desirable that he should acquire a familiarity with the operations required in the delineation of isolated objects, previously to making any attempt to place them in combination for the purpose of producing a complete drawing. The student will, therefore, do well to study carefully and to practice diligently the forms and examples given in this section. Straight and curved lines. All straight lines, however short, should be ruled, whether they be drawn with the pencil or the pen. Pencil lines, which are intended to serve merely as guides to the pen, should be drawn lightly, as otherwise it will be difficult to rub them out without injuring the ink. They should also be drawn a little beyond the point at which the line is required to terminate, because the intersection of the lines at that point makes it more distinctly visible, and there is, consequently, less danger of passing beyond that point, or of stopping short of it, when inking in. It is very important not to stop short of the required length when ruling a straight line with a pen, for it is extremely difficult to lengthen the line subsequently without leaving the join visible. An accurate line cannot be drawn unless the point of the pencil or the pen be kept close up to the rule, and to do this, the top should be inclined a little outward. Before inking in a line that has been drawn in pencil, the India rubber should be passed lightly over it to remove the particles of lead adhering to the paper. For if these particles are allowed to remain, they get between the nibs of the pen and prevent the ink from flowing freely. The chief difficulties in ruling a straight line with the pen are to keep it of a regular thickness throughout, and when numerous parallel lines have to be drawn, to keep them at equal distances apart. To draw an even line, a first requisite is that the pen be in good condition. Frequently, it will be found when drawing fine lines that the pen ceases to mark before the end of the line is reached, and as we have already said, it is very difficult to join a line without leaving visible traces of the operation. To remedy this defect, the pen must be reset as described in Section 1. If a very hard pencil has been used, or if the pencil has been pressed heavily upon the paper, the pencil line will lie in a groove in the paper, and as the nib of the pen will not touch the bottom of this groove, the line drawn will be ragged. Another cause of unevenness is unduly pressing the pen against the rule. This pressure closes the nibs, and besides producing an irregularity in the thickness of the line, is very apt to cause a blot by forcing out the ink, which adheres to the rule when brought into contact with it. To prevent this, care should be taken to press the pen very lightly against the edge of the rule. A pen is manufactured by Stanley of Holborn, London, which has the back nib much stiffer than the other, so that all danger of defect from this cause is removed by the construction of the instrument. To ensure a good line, the pen should rest lightly upon the paper, and the handle of the pen should make the same angle with the paper from the beginning to the end of the line. A considerable amount of practice is required to accomplish this, and to acquire the habit, the same attention should be given to the pencil as to the pen. The ability to draw a number of parallel lines at equal distances apart without measuring requires considerable training of the eye, and this training can be obtained from practice alone. This ability must be acquired before anything further is attempted, and the student who spends a good deal of time in its acquisition may have the satisfaction of knowing that while he is going through this somewhat monotonous practice, besides exercising himself in drawing accurate lines, he is acquiring a correctness of eye and a power of hand that will be of incalculable service to him later. The straight line, besides being used for the outlines of regular objects, is employed conventionally for various purposes. When it is required to show an object in section, the part in section is covered with straight and parallel lines drawn at an angle of 45 degrees and at equal distances apart, as in Figure 38. To represent standing water, as ponds and lakes, horizontal straight lines are drawn parallel to each other and at equal distances apart over the surface, as shown in Figure 39. Curved lines, when arcs of circles, are drawn by the compasses. Other curves are drawn by hand through points previously found. To draw the curve correctly through these points, unless they be very numerous, a knowledge of the nature of the curve is necessary, which the draftsman should in all cases endeavor to obtain. When the curved line is long, it is usually inked in with the drawing pen, with the aid of an instrument called the French curve, or cardboard molds cut for the purpose. But for short lines, an ordinary fine-pointed steel pen point, or better, a good quill, is used. In general, all lines drawn by hand should be drawn towards the body, as a better command of the pen can be obtained in that direction than in any other. In inking in curves by this means, the draftsman should proceed continuously along the pencil-drawn line, by partly repeated touches with the pen point, so held that the divided points of the pen may follow partly in the same track. Each touch should be made about 1/30th of an inch in length, and it should begin and end fine. Each succeeding touch must begin half its length back, so that the line is advanced by 1/60th of an inch. In map drawing, all irregular lines are drawn in this way. Tracing maps will afford the student excellent practice in this mode of using the pen. Lines of uneven thickness. Though generally a line is required to be of even thickness throughout, cases sometimes occur in which a variation in the thickness may be made to express some feature or quality of the landscape. The usual application of this kind of line is to mark the outline of rivers, lakes, and ponds, as shown in Figure 40. The drawing of such a line presents no difficulty. The increased thickness is produced by going over those parts of the line again with the pen. Care must, however, be taken not to make a sudden increase in the breadth of the line, but to begin and end imperceptibly. The broken line. The broken line, shown in Figure 41, is of frequent occurrence in all kinds of drawings. In architectural and engineering drawings, it is usually employed in roofs, as in Figure 42, and for water in sections, as in Figure 43. It is also used in combination with other lines for various purposes. In drawing a succession of broken lines, care must be taken not to allow the break in one line to be immediately over that in another. The effect may be varied considerably by increasing or diminishing the extent of the break. As in section lining, the lines should be at regular intervals apart and be all of the same degree of fineness. Broken lines are sometimes used upon the face of stone buildings, instead of marking in the joints and etching or coloring. In such a case, the breaks are long and the lines widely spaced. The dotted line. Of still more frequent occurrence is the dotted line. There are two kinds of dotted lines, distinguished by the shape of the dot, and known as the long and the round dotted line. These are shown in Figure 44, as well as a combination of the two. The round dotted line is of very general application. In architectural and mechanical drawings, it is used to distinguish hidden parts and to mark the path of a moving piece in a machine. In plans, it is used to show the position of proposed works, to denote the walks through pleasure grounds and gardens, to indicate lines chained over in surveying, and frequently for other purposes, at the pleasure of the draftsman. The long dotted line is employed to mark the boundaries of a township, the navigable channel of a river or creek, and in large-scale maps to show farm and bridle roads, footpaths, and the divisions of land among different tenants. The combination of the long and round dotted lines is used for the boundaries of a parish. Another combination of 2 round and 1 long dots, or sometimes of 3 round and 1 long, is used to denote proposed railways, canals, roads, and other similar works. To draw a good dotted line requires some care. The difficulty lies in keeping the dots at equal distances apart, and in making them equal in size. And unless both these conditions are fulfilled, the line will not present a pleasing appearance. To obviate this difficulty, an instrument is sold by mathematical instrument makers called the dotting or wheel pen. but it requires very great care in using, as otherwise it frequently happens that the ink escapes from it and spoils the drawing. For this reason, its use has been generally abandoned by draftsmen. But if the instrument were better constructed and carefully handled, it might be made to do good service. Combinations of straight, broken, and dotted lines. Combinations of the foregoing lines are used for various purposes. Some draftsmen employ alternate, full, and dotted lines to denote wood in section, as in figures 45 and 46. When wood is used in combination with iron or other metal, this is a very good way of distinguishing it. Wood graining, though not made up of straight, broken, or dotted lines, yet partakes somewhat of the nature of all three kinds, and may therefore be introduced here. Oak graining is shown in figure 47, and fir graining in figure 48. The former is executed with a drawing pen, and requires some care and practice. The latter is most readily done with a common pen or a crow quill. And wood is grained as shown in figure 49. The spring bows are very suitable for drawing in the circles, as a certain degree of turn to the nut will open the ink leg to the required distance after drawing each circle. A few broken wavy lines, called shakes, radiating from the center, produce a good effect. When several pieces of end wood come together, the centers in each should not be in the same relative position. End of section 9. Section 10 of the Insomnia collection, Volume 6. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Verla Viera. Excerpts from Aviation Engines. Design, Construction, Operation, and Repair. A complete, practical treatise outlining clearly the elements of internal combustion engineering, with special reference to the design, construction, operation, and repair of airplane power plants. Also, the auxiliary engine systems, such as lubrication, carburation, ignition, and cooling. It includes complete instructions for engine repairing and systematic location of troubles, tool equipment, and use of tools. Also outlines the latest mechanical processes. By First Lieutenant Victor W. Paget, ASSC, USR, Assistant Engineering Officer, Signal Corps Aviation School, Mineola, Long Island. Author of The Modern Gasoline Automobile, etc. Contains valuable instructions for all aviation students, mechanicians, squadron engineering officers, and all interested in the construction and upkeep of airplane power plants. New York, the Norman W. Henley Publishing Company, 2 West 45th Street, 1917. Preface. In presenting this treatise on aviation engines, the writer realizes that the rapidly developing art makes it difficult to outline all latest forms or describe all current engineering practice. This exposition has been prepared primarily for instruction purposes and is adapted for men in the aviation section, Signal Corps, and students who wish to become aviators or aviation mechanicians. Every effort has been made to have the engineering information accurate, but owing to the diversity of authorities consulted and use of data translated from foreign language periodicals, it is expected that some slight errors will be present. The writer wishes to acknowledge his indebtedness to such firms as the Curtiss Airplane and Motor Company, Hall Scott Company, Thomas Morse Aircraft Corporation, and General Vehicle Company for photographs and helpful descriptive matter. Special attention has been paid to instructions on tool equipment, use of tools, troubleshooting, and engine repairs, as it is on these points that the average aviation student is weakest. Only such theoretical consideration of thermodynamics as was deemed absolutely necessary to secure a proper understanding of engine action after consulting several instructors is included, the writer's efforts having been confined to the preparation of a practical series of instructions that would be of the greatest value to those who need a diversified knowledge of internal combustion engine operation and repair, and who must acquire it quickly. The engines described and illustrated are all practical forms that have been fitted to airplanes capable of making flights and may be considered fairly representative of the present state of the art. Victor W. Paget, First Lieutenant, ASSC, USR, Mineola, Long Island, October 1917. Chapter 1. Brief Consideration of Aircraft Types. The conquest of the air is one of the most stupendous achievements of the ages. Human flight opens the sky to man as a new road, and because it is a road free of all obstructions and leads everywhere, affording the shortest distance to any place, it offers to man the prospect of unlimited freedom. The aircraft promises to span continents like railroads, to bridge seas like ships, to go over mountains and forests like birds, and to quicken and simplify the problems of transportation. While the actual conquest of the air is an accomplishment just being realized in our days, the idea and yearning to conquer the air are old, possibly as old as intellect itself. The myths of different races tell of winged gods and flying men, and show that for ages to fly was the highest conception of the sublime. No other agent is more responsible for sustained flight than the internal combustion motor, and it was only when this form of prime mover had been fully developed that it was possible for man to leave the ground and alight at will, not depending upon the caprices of the winds or lifting power of gases, as with the balloon. It is safe to say that the solution of the problem of flight would have been attained many years ago if the proper source of power had been available, as all the essential elements of the modern airplane and dirigible balloon, other than the power plant, were known to early philosophers and scientists. Aeronautics is divided into two fundamentally different branches, aviatics and aerostatics. The first comprises all types of airplanes and heavier-than-air flying machines, such as the helicopters, kites, etc. The second includes dirigible balloons, passive balloons, and all craft which rise in the air by utilizing the lifting force of gases. Airplanes are the only practical form of heavier-than-air machines, as the helicopters, machines intended to be lifted directly into the air by propellers without the sustaining effect of planes, and ornithopters, or flapping wing types, have not been thoroughly developed, and in fact, there are so many serious mechanical problems to be solved before either of these types of aircraft will function properly, that experts express grave doubts regarding the practicability of either. Airplanes are divided into two main types. monoplanes or single surface forms, and biplanes or machines having two sets of lifting surfaces, one suspended over the other. A third type, the triplane, is not very widely used. Dirigible balloons are divided into three classes: the rigid, the semi-rigid, and the non-rigid. The rigid has a frame or skeleton of either wood or metal inside of the bag to stiffen it. The semi-rigid is reinforced by a wire net and metal attachments, while the non-rigid is just a bag filled with gas. The airplane, more than the dirigible and balloon, stands as the emblem of the conquest of the air. Two reasons for this are that power flight is a real conquest of the air, a real victory over the battling elements. Secondly, because the airplane, or any flying machine that may follow, brings air travel within the reach of everybody. In practical development, the dirigible may be the steamship of the air, which will render invaluable services of a certain kind, and the airplane will be the automobile of the air, to be used by the multitude, perhaps for as many purposes as the automobile is now being used. Chapter 2: Operating Principles of 2- and 4-stroke cycle engines. Before discussing the construction of the various forms of internal combustion engines, it may be well to describe the operating cycle of the types most generally used. The 2-cycle engine is the simplest because there are no valves in connection with the cylinder, as the gas is introduced into that member and expelled from it through ports cored into the cylinder walls. These are covered by the piston at a certain portion of its travel, and uncovered at other parts of its stroke. In the 4-cycle engine, the explosive gas is admitted to the cylinder through a port at the head end closed by a valve, while the exhaust gas is expelled through another port controlled in a similar manner. These valves are operated by mechanism distinct from the piston. The action of the 4-cycle type may be easily understood if one refers to illustrations at figures 5 and 6. It is called the 4-stroke engine because the piston must make 4 strokes in the cylinder for each explosion or power impulse obtained. The principle of the gas engine of the internal combustion type is similar to that of a gun, i.e., power is obtained by the rapid combustion of some explosive or other quick-burning substance. The bullet is driven out of the gun barrel by the pressure of the gas evolved when the charge of powder is ignited. The piston or movable element of the gas engine is driven from the closed or head end to the crank end of the cylinder by a similar expansion of gases resulting from combustion. The first operation in firing a gun or securing an explosion in the cylinder of the gas engine is to fill the combustion space with combustible material. This is done by a downstroke of the piston, during which time the inlet valve opens to admit the gaseous charge to the cylinder interior. This operation is shown at figure 5a. The second operation is to compress this gas, which is done by an upward stroke of the piston, as shown at figure 5b. When the top of the compression stroke is reached, the gas is ignited and the piston is driven down toward the open end of the cylinder, as indicated at figure 6c. The fourth operation, or exhaust stroke, is performed by the return upward movement of the piston, as shown at figure 6d, during which time the exhaust valve is opened to permit the burnt gases to leave the cylinder. As soon as the piston reaches the top of its exhaust stroke, the energy stored in the flywheel rim during the power stroke causes that member to continue revolving, and as the piston again travels on its downstroke, the inlet valve opens and admits a charge of fresh gas, and the cycle of operations is repeated. The illustrations at Figure 7 show how the various cycle functions take place in an L-head type water-cooled cylinder engine. The sections at A and C are taken through the inlet valve. Those at B and D are taken through the exhaust valve. The two-cycle engine works on a different principle, as while only the combustion chamber end of the piston is employed to do useful work in the four-cycle engine, both upper and lower portions are called upon to perform the functions necessary to two-cycle engine operation. Instead of the gas being admitted into the cylinder, as is the case with the four-stroke engine, it is first drawn into the engine base, where it receives a preliminary compression prior to its transfer to the working end of the cylinder. The views at Figure 8 should indicate clearly the operation of the two-port, two-cycle engine. At A, the piston is seen reaching the top of its stroke, and the gas above the piston is being compressed, ready for ignition, while the suction in the engine base causes the automatic valve to open and admits mixture from the carburetor to the crankcase. When the piston reaches the top of its stroke, the compressed gas is ignited, and the piston is driven down on the power stroke, compressing the gas in the engine base. When the top of the piston uncovers the exhaust port, the flaming gas escapes because of its pressure. A downward movement of the piston uncovers the inlet port opposite the exhaust and permits the fresh gas to bypass through the transfer passage from the engine base to the cylinder. The conditions with the intake and exhaust port fully opened are clearly shown at Figure 8C. The deflector plate on the top of the piston directs the entering fresh gas to the top of the cylinder and prevents the main portion of the gas stream from flowing out through the open exhaust port. On the next upstroke of the piston, the gas in the cylinder is compressed and the inlet valve opened, as shown at A, to permit a fresh charge to enter the engine base. The operating principle of the three-port, two-cycle engine is practically the same as that previously described, with the exception that the gas is admitted to the crankcase through a third port in the cylinder wall, which is uncovered by the piston when that member reaches the end of its upstroke. The action of the three-port form can be readily ascertained by studying the diagrams given at Figure 9. Combination 2 and 3-port engines have been evolved, and other modifications made to improve the action. Theory of the gas and gasoline engine. The laws controlling the elements that create a power by their expansion by heat due to combustion, when properly understood, become a matter of computation in regard to their value as an agent for generating power in the various kinds of explosive engines. The method of heating the elements of power in explosive engines greatly widens the limits of temperature as available in other types of heat engines. It disposes of many of the practical troubles of hot air, and even of steam engines, in the simplicity and directness of application of the elements of power. In the explosive engine, the difficulty of conveying heat for producing expansive effect by convection is displaced by the generation of the required heat within the expansive element and at the instant of its useful work. The low conductivity of heat to and from air has been the great obstacle in the practical development of the hot air engine, while, on the contrary, it has become the source of economy and practicability in the development of the internal combustion engine. The action of air, gas, and the vapors of gasoline and petroleum oil, whether singly or mixed, is affected by changes of temperature, practically in nearly the same ratio. But when the elements that produce combustion are interchanged in confined spaces, there is a marked difference of effect. The oxygen of the air, the hydrogen and carbon of a gas, or vapor of gasoline or petroleum oil are the elements that by combustion produce heat to expand the nitrogen of the air, and the watery vapor produced by the union of the oxygen in the air and the hydrogen in the gas, as well as also the monoxide and carbonic acid gas that may be formed by the union of the carbon of gas or vapor with part of the oxygen of the air. The various mixtures, as between air and gas, or air and vapor, with the proportion of the products of combustion left in the cylinder from a previous combustion, form the elements to be considered in estimating the amount of pressure that may be obtained by their combustion and expansive force. The isothermal law. The natural laws, long since promulgated by Boyle, Gay-Lussac, and others, on the subject of the expansion and compression of gases by force and by heat, and their variable pressures and temperatures when confined, are conceded to be practically true and applicable to all gases, whether single, mixed, or combined. The law formulated by Boyle only relates to the compression and expansion of gases without a change of temperature, and is stated in these words: if the temperature of a gas be kept constant, its pressure or elastic force will vary inversely as the volume it occupies. It is expressed in the formula P times V equals C, or pressure times volume equals constant. Hence, C divided by P equals V, and C divided by V equals P. Thus, the curve formed by increments of pressure during the expansion or compression of a given volume of gas without change of temperature is designated as the isothermal curve, in which the volume multiplied by the pressure is a constant value in expansion, and inversely, the pressure divided by the volume is a constant value in compressing a gas. But as compression and expansion of gases require force for their accomplishment mechanically, or by the application or abstraction of heat chemically, or by convection, a second condition becomes involved, which was formulated into a law of thermodynamics by Gay-Lussac under the following conditions. A given volume of gas under a free piston expands by heat and contracts by the loss of heat, its volume causing a proportional movement of a free piston equal to 1/273rd part of the cylinder volume for each degree centigrade difference in temperature, or 1/492nd part of its volume for each degree Fahrenheit. With a fixed piston, constant volume, the pressure is increased or decreased by an increase or decrease of heat in the same proportion of 1/273rd part of its pressure for each degree centigrade, or 1/492nd part of its pressure for each degree Fahrenheit change in temperature. This is the natural sequence of the law of mechanical equivalent, which is a necessary deduction from the principle that nothing in nature can be lost or wasted, for all the heat that is imparted to or abstracted from a gaseous body must be accounted for, either as heat or its equivalent transformed into some other form of energy. In the case of a piston moving in a cylinder by the expansive force of heat in a gaseous body, all the heat expended in expansion of the gas is turned into work. The balance must be accounted for in absorption by the cylinder or radiation. The adiabatic law. This theory is equally applicable to the cooling of gases by abstraction of heat, or by cooling due to expansion by the motion of a piston. The denominators of these heat fractions of expansion or contraction represent the absolute zero of cold below the freezing point of water, and read minus 273 degrees Celsius or minus 492.66 degrees equals minus 460.66 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. And these are the starting points of reference in computing the heat expansion in gas engines. According to Boyle's law, called the first law of gases, there are but two characteristics of a gas and their variations to be considered, viz., volume and pressure, while by the law of Gay-Lussac, called the second law of gases, a third is added, consisting of the value of the absolute temperature, counting from absolute zero to the temperatures at which the operations take place. This is the adiabatic law. The ratio of the variation of the three conditions, volume, pressure, and heat, from the absolute zero temperature has a certain rate in which the volume multiplied by the pressure and the product divided by the absolute temperature equals the ratio of expansion for each degree. If a volume of air is contained in a cylinder having a piston and fitted with an indicator, the piston, if moved to and fro slowly, will alternately compress and expand the air, and the indicator pencil will trace a line or lines upon the card, which lines register the change of pressure and volume occurring in the cylinder. If the piston is perfectly free from leakage, and it be supposed that the temperature of the air is kept quite constant, then the line so traced is called an isothermal line, and the pressure at any point when multiplied by the volume is a constant, according to Boyle's law, P times V equals a constant. If, however, the piston is moved very rapidly, the air will not remain at constant temperature, but the temperature will increase because work has been done upon the air, and the heat has no time to escape by conduction. If no heat whatever is lost by any cause, the line will be traced over and over again by the indicator pencil, the cooling by expansion doing work precisely equaling the heating by compression. This is the line of no transmission of heat, therefore known as adiabatic. The expansion of a gas 1/273rd of its volume for every degree centigrade added to its temperature is equal to the decimal 0.00366, the coefficient of expansion for centigrade units. To any given volume of a gas, its expansion may be computed by multiplying the coefficient by the number of degrees, and by reversing the process the degree of acquired heat may be obtained approximately. These methods are not strictly in conformity with the absolute mathematical formula, because there is a small increase in the increment of expansion of a dry gas, and there is also a slight difference in the increment of expansion due to moisture in the atmosphere and to the vapor of water formed by the union of the hydrogen and oxygen in the combustion chamber of explosive engines. Chapter 3. Efficiency of internal combustion engines. Efficiencies are worked out for a variety of theoretical and unknown conditions of combustion in the cylinder, ratios of clearance and cylinder volume, and the uncertain condition of the products of combustion left from the last impulse and the wall temperature. But they are of but little value, except as a mathematical inquiry as to possibilities. The real commercial efficiency of a gas or gasoline engine depends upon the volume of gas or liquid at some assigned cost, required per actual brake horsepower per hour, in which an indicator card should show that the mechanical action of the valve gear and ignition was as perfect as practicable, and that the ratio of clearance, space, and cylinder volume gave a satisfactory terminal pressure and compression, i.e., the difference between the power figured from the indicator card and the brake power being the friction loss of the engine. In four-cycle motors of the compression type, the efficiencies are greatly advanced by compression, producing a more complete infusion of the mixture of gas or vapor and air, quicker firing, and far greater pressure than is possible with the two-cycle type previously described. In the practical operation of the gas engine during the past 20 years, the gas consumption efficiencies per indicated horsepower have gradually risen from 17% to a maximum of 40% of the theoretical heat, and this has been done chiefly through a decreased combustion chamber and increased compression, the compression having gradually increased in practice from 30 pounds per square inch to above 100. But there seems to be a limit to compression as the efficiency ratio decreases with greater increase in compression. It has been shown that an ideal efficiency of 33% for 38 pounds, compression will increase to 40% for 66 pounds, and 43% for 88 pounds compression. On the other hand, greater compression means greater explosive pressure and greater strain on the engine structure, which will probably retain in future practice the compression between the limits of 40 and 90 pounds, except in supercompression engines intended for high-altitude work, where compression pressures as high as 125 pounds have been used. In experiments made by Dugald Clerk in England with a combustion chamber equal to 0.6 of the space swept by the piston with a compression of 38 pounds, the consumption of gas was 24 cubic feet per indicated horsepower per hour. With 0.4 compression space and 61 pounds compression, the consumption of gas was 20 cubic feet per indicated horsepower per hour, and with 0.34 compression space and 87 pounds compression, the consumption of gas fell to 14.8 cubic feet per indicated horsepower per hour, the actual efficiencies being respectively 17, 21, and 25%. This was with a Crossley four-cycle engine. Various measures of efficiency. The efficiencies in regard to power in a heat engine may be divided into four kinds as follows. 1. The first is known as the maximum theoretical efficiency of a perfect engine, represented by the lines in the indicator diagram. It is expressed by the formula T sub 1 minus T sub 0 divided by T sub 1, and shows the work of a perfect cycle in an engine working between the received temperature plus absolute temperature, T sub 1, and the initial atmospheric temperature plus absolute temperature, T sub 0. 2. The second is the actual heat efficiency, or the ratio of the heat turned into work to the total heat received by the engine. It expresses the indicated horsepower. 3. The third is the ratio between the second, or actual heat efficiency, and the first, or maximum theoretical efficiency of a perfect cycle. It represents the greatest possible utilization of the power of heat in an internal combustion engine. 4. The fourth is the mechanical efficiency. This is the ratio between the actual horsepower delivered by the engine through a dynamometer, or measured by a brake horsepower, and the indicated horsepower. The difference between the two is the power lost by engine friction. In regard to the general heat efficiency of the materials of power in explosive engines, we find that with good illuminating gas, the practical efficiency varies from 25 to 40%. Kerosene motors, 20 to 30. Gasoline motors, 20 to 32. Acetylene, 25 to 35. Alcohol, 20 to 30% of their heat value. The great variation is no doubt due to the imperfect mixtures and variable conditions of the old and new charge in the cylinder, uncertainty as to leakage, and the perfection of combustion. In the diesel motors operating under high pressure, up to nearly 500 pounds, an efficiency of 36% is claimed. The graphic diagram at Figure 12 is of special value, as it shows clearly how the heat produced by charge combustion is expended in an engine of average design. On general principles, the greater difference between the heat of combustion and the heat at exhaust is the relative measure of the heat turned into work, which represents the degree of efficiency without loss during expansion. The mathematical formulas appertaining to the computation of the element of heat and its work in an explosive engine are in a large measure dependent upon assumed values, as the conditions of the heat of combustion are made uncertain by the mixing of the fresh charge with the products of a previous combustion, and by absorption, radiation, and leakage. The computation of the temperature from the observed pressure may be made as before explained, but for compression engines, the needed starting points for computation are very uncertain and can only be approximated from the exact measure and value of the elements of combustion in a cylinder charge. Chapter 4. Engine Parts and Functions. The principal elements of a gas engine are not difficult to understand, and their functions are easily defined. In place of the barrel of the gun, one has a smoothly machined cylinder in which a small cylindrical or barrel-shaped element fitting the bore closely may be likened to a bullet or cannonball. It differs in this important respect, however, as while the shot is discharged from the mouth of the cannon, the piston member sliding inside of the main cylinder cannot leave it, as its movements back and forth from the open to the closed end and back again are limited by simple mechanical connection or linkage, which comprises crank and connection rod. It is by this means that the reciprocating movement of the piston is transformed into a rotary motion of the crankshaft. The flywheel is a heavy member attached to the crankshaft of an automobile engine, which has energy stored in its rim as the member revolves, and the momentum of this revolving mass tends to equalize the intermittent pushes on the piston head produced by the explosion of the gas in the cylinder. In aviation engines, the weight of the propeller or that of rotating cylinders themselves performs the duty of a flywheel, so no separate member is needed. If some explosive is placed in the chamber formed by the piston and closed end of the cylinder and exploded, the piston would be the only part that would yield to the pressure which would produce a downward movement. As this is forced down, the crankshaft is turned by the connecting rod, and as this part is hinged at both ends, it is free to oscillate as the crank turns, and thus the piston may slide back and forth while the crankshaft is rotating or describing a curvilinear path. In addition to the simple elements described, it is evident that a gasoline engine must have other parts. The most important of these are the valves, of which there are generally 2 to each cylinder. One closes the passage connecting to the gas supply and opens during one stroke of the piston in order to let the explosive gas into the combustion chamber. The other member, or exhaust valve, serves as a cover for the opening through which the burned gases can leave the cylinder after their work is done. The spark plug is a simple device which may be compared to the fuse or percussion cap of the cannon. It permits one to produce an electric spark in the cylinder when the piston is at the best point to utilize the pressure which obtains when the compressed gas is fired. The valves are open one at a time, the inlet valve being lifted from its seat while the cylinder is filling, and the exhaust valve is opened when the cylinder is being cleared. They are normally kept seated by means of compression springs. In the simple motor shown at Figure 5, the exhaust valve is operated by means of a pivoted bell crank rocked by a cam which turns at half the speed of the crankshaft. The inlet valve operates automatically, as will be explained in proper sequence. In order to obtain a perfectly tight combustion chamber, both intake and exhaust valves are closed before the gas is ignited, because all of the pressure produced by the exploding gas is to be directed against the top of the movable piston. When the piston reaches the bottom of its power stroke, the exhaust valve is lifted by means of the bell crank, which is rocked because of the point or lift on the cam. The camshaft is driven by positive gearing and revolves at half the engine speed. The exhaust valve remains open during the whole of the return stroke of the piston, and as this member moves toward the closed end of the cylinder, it forces out burned gases ahead of it through the passage controlled by the exhaust valve. The camshaft is revolved at half the engine speed because the exhaust valve is raised from its seat during only one stroke out of 4, or only once every 2 revolutions. Obviously, if the cam was turned at the same speed as the crankshaft, it would remain open once every revolution, whereas the burned gases are expelled from the individual cylinders only once in 2 turns of the crankshaft. Why multiple cylinder forms are best. Owing to the vibration which obtains from the heavy explosion in the large single-cylinder engines used for stationary power Other forms were evolved in which the cylinder was smaller and power obtained by running the engine faster, but these are suitable only for very low powers. When a single-cylinder engine is employed, a very heavy flywheel is needed to carry the moving parts through idle strokes necessary to obtain a power impulse. For this reason, automobile and aircraft designers must use more than one cylinder, and the tendency is to produce power by frequently occurring light impulses rather than by a smaller number of explosions having greater force. When a single-cylinder motor is employed, the construction is heavier than is needed with a multi-cylinder form. Using 2 or more cylinders conduces to steady power generation and a lessening of vibration. Most modern motor cars employ 4-cylinder engines because a power impulse may be secured twice every revolution of the crankshaft, or a total of 4 power strokes during 2 revolutions. The parts are so arranged that while the charge of gas in one cylinder is exploding, those which come next in firing order are compressing, discharging the inert gases, and drawing in a fresh charge, respectively. When the power stroke is completed in one cylinder, the piston in that member in which a charge of gas has just been compressed has reached the top of its stroke, and when the gas is exploded, the piston is reciprocated and keeps the crankshaft turning. When a multiple-cylinder engine is used, the flywheel can be made much lighter than that of the simpler form and eliminated altogether in some designs. In fact, many modern multiple-cylinder engines developing 300 horsepower weigh less than the early single and double-cylinder forms, which developed but 1/10 or 1/20th that amount of energy. Describing sequence of operations. Referring to Figure 22A, the sequence of operation in a single-cylinder motor can be easily understood. Assuming that the crankshaft is turning in the direction of the arrow, it will be seen that the intake stroke comes first, then the compression, which is followed by the power impulse, and lastly, the exhaust stroke. If 2 cylinders are used, it is possible to balance the explosions in such a way that one will occur each revolution. This is true with either one of 2 forms of 4-cycle motors. At B, a 2-cylinder vertical engine using a crankshaft in which the crank pins are on the same plane is shown. The 2 pistons move up and down simultaneously. Referring to the diagram describing the strokes, and assuming that the outer circle represents the cycle of operations in one cylinder, while the inner circle represents the sequence of events in the other cylinder, while cylinder number 1 is taking in a fresh charge of gas, cylinder number 2 is exploding. When cylinder number 1 is compressing, cylinder number 2 is exhausting. During the time that the charge in cylinder number 1 is exploded, cylinder number 2 is being filled with fresh gas. While the exhaust gases are being discharged from cylinder number 1, cylinder number 2 is compressing the gas previously taken. The same condition obtains when the crank pins are arranged at 180 degrees and the cylinders are opposed, as shown at C. The reason that the 2-cylinder opposed motor is more popular than that having 2 vertical cylinders is that it is difficult to balance the construction shown at B, so that the vibration will not be excessive. The 2-cylinder opposed motor has much less vibration than the other form, and as the explosions occur evenly, and the motor is a simple one to construct. It has been very popular in the past on light cars and has received a limited application on some early light airplanes. To demonstrate very clearly the advantages of multiple cylinder engines, the diagrams at Figure 23 have been prepared. At A, a 3-cylinder motor having crank pins at 120 degrees, which means that they are spaced at thirds of the circle. We have a form of construction that gives a more even turning than that possible with a 2-cylinder engine. Instead of 1 explosion per revolution of the crankshaft, one will obtain 3 explosions in 2 revolutions. The manner in which the explosion strokes occur and the manner they overlap strokes in the other cylinder is shown at A, assuming that the cylinders fire in the following order: first, number 1, then number 2, and last, number 3. We will see that while cylinder number 1, represented by the outer circle, is on the power stroke, cylinder number 3 has completed the last 2/3 of its exhaust stroke and has started on its intake stroke. Cylinder number 2, represented by the middle circle, during the same period has completed its intake stroke and 2/3 of its compression stroke. A study of the diagram will show that there is an appreciable lapse of time between each explosion. 3-cylinder engines are not used on aircraft at the present time, though Blériot's flight across the British Channel was made with a 3-cylinder Anzani motor. It was not a conventional form, however. The 3-cylinder engine is practically obsolete at this time for any purpose except penguins or school machines that are incapable of flight, and which are used in some French training schools for aviators. Radial cylinder arrangements. While the fixed cylinder forms of engines, having the cylinders in tandem in the 4- and 6-cylinder models, as shown at figures 33 to 35 inclusive, and the 8-cylinder V-types, as outlined at figures 36 and 37, have been generally used and are most in favor at the present time. Other forms of motors having unconventional cylinder arrangements have been devised, though most of these are practically obsolete. While many methods of decreasing weight and increasing mechanical efficiency of a motor are known to designers, one of the first to be applied to the construction of aeronautical power plants was an endeavor to group the components, which in themselves were not extremely light, into a form that would be considerably lighter than the conventional design. As an example, we may consider those multiple cylinder forms in which the cylinders are disposed around a short crankcase, either radiating from a common center, as at figure 38, or of the fan shape, shown at figure 39. This makes it possible to use a crankcase but slightly larger than that needed for 1 or 2 cylinders, and it also permits of a corresponding decrease in length of the crankshaft. The weight of the engine is lessened because of the reduction in crankshaft and crankcase weight, and the elimination of a number of intermediate bearings and their supporting webs, which would be necessary with the usual tandem construction. While there are 6 power impulses to every 2 revolutions of the crankshaft, in the 6-cylinder engine they are not evenly spaced as is possible with the conventional arrangement. In the Anzani form, which is shown at figure 38, the crankcase is stationary, and a revolving crankshaft is employed as in conventional construction. The cylinders are 5 in number, and the engine develops 40 to 50 horsepower, with a weight of 72 kilograms or 158.4 pounds. The cylinders are of the usual air-cooled form, having cooling flanges only part of the way down the cylinder. By using 5 cylinders, it is possible to have the power impulses come regularly, they coming 145-degree crankshaft travel apart, the crankshaft making 2 turns to every 5 explosions. The balance is good and power output regular. The valves are placed directly in the cylinder head and are operated by a common push rod. Attention is directed to the novel method of installing the carburetor, which supplies the mixture to the engine base, from which inlet pipes radiate to the various cylinders. This engine is used on French school machines. In the form shown at Figure 39, 6 cylinders are used, all being placed above the crankshaft center line. This engine is also of the air-cooled form and develops 50 horsepower and weighs 105 kilograms or 231 pounds. The carburetor is connected to a manifold casting attached to the engine base, from which the induction pipes radiate to the various cylinders. The propeller design and size relative to the engine is clearly shown in this view. While flights have been made with both of the engines described, this method of construction is not generally followed and has been almost entirely displaced abroad by the revolving motors or by the more conventional 8-cylinder V engines. Both of the engines shown were designed about 8 years ago and would be entirely too small and weak for use in modern airplanes intended for active duty. Chapter 5. Properties of Liquid Fuels. There is no appliance that has more material value upon the efficiency of the internal combustion motor than the carburetor or vaporizer which supplies the explosive gas to the cylinders. It is only in recent years that engineers have realized the importance of using carburetors that are efficient and that are so strongly and simply made that there will be little liability of derangement. As the power obtained from the gas engine depends upon the combustion of fuel in the cylinders, it is evident that if the gas supplied does not have the proper proportions of elements to ensure rapid combustion, the efficiency of the engine will be low. When a gas engine is used as a stationary installation, it is possible to use ordinary illuminating or natural gas for fuel, but when this prime mover is applied to automobiles or airplanes, it is evident that considerable difficulty would be experienced in carrying enough compressed coal gas to supply the engine for even a very short trip. Fortunately, the development of the internal combustion motor was not delayed by the lack of suitable fuel. Engineers were familiar with the properties of certain liquids which gave off vapors that could be mixed with air to form an explosive gas which burned very well in the engine cylinders. A very small quantity of such liquids would suffice for a very satisfactory period of operation. The problem to be solved before these liquids could be applied in a practical manner was to evolve suitable apparatus for vaporizing them without waste. Among the liquids that can be combined with air and burned, gasoline is the most volatile and is the fuel utilized by internal combustion engines. The widely increasing scope of usefulness of the internal combustion motor has made it imperative that other fuels be applied in some instances, because the supply of gasoline may in time become inadequate to supply the demand. In fact, Abroad, this fuel sells for 50 to 200% more than it does in America, because most of the gasoline used must be imported from this country or Russia. Because of this, foreign engineers have experimented widely with other substances, such as alcohol, benzol, and kerosene, but more to determine if they can be used to advantage in motor cars than in airplane engines. Principles of carburation outlined. The process of carburation is combining the volatile vapors which evaporate from the hydrocarbon liquids with certain proportions of air to form an inflammable gas. The quantities of air needed vary with different liquids, and some mixtures burn quicker than do other combinations of air and vapor. Combustion is simply burning, and it may be rapid, moderate, or slow. Mixtures of gasoline and air burn quickly. In fact, the combustion is so rapid that it is almost instantaneous, and we obtain what is commonly termed an explosion. Therefore, the explosion of gas in the automobile engine cylinder, which produces the power, is really a combination of chemical elements which produce heat and an increase in the volume of the gas because of the increase in temperature. If the gasoline mixture is not properly proportioned, the rate of burning will vary, and if the mixture is either too rich or too weak, the power of the explosion is reduced, and the amount of power applied to the piston is decreased proportionately. In determining the proper proportions of gasoline and air, one must take the chemical composition of gasoline into account. The ordinary liquid used for fuel is said to contain about 84% carbon and 16% hydrogen. Air is composed of oxygen and nitrogen, and the former has a great affinity, or combining power, with the two constituents of hydrocarbon liquids. Therefore, what we call an explosion is merely an indication that oxygen in the air has combined with the carbon and hydrogen of the gasoline. End of section 10. End of the Insomnia collection, volume 6.